I think in Maine we have more opportunities. I mean, we're not signing up to go to war anymore at 18. You know, like we have the opportunity to. I have a 15-year-old cousin who's building AI businesses. He's got clients on the phone who want to implement his solutions. It's just being enthusiastic and energetic about what you're doing and passionate about, and sharing that with people. Maine has always been an entrepreneurial state. I've done a lot of research on Maine's history. You know, it's incredible what people have done just like in their garage here. I think my generation has gotten so complacent and we've been given handouts for so long, and we haven't had to go to war and fight for something bigger than ourselves. And I think once we wake up to that fact and things get bad enough where we're like, oh crap, I think
it's kind of like that old adage that like tough times make strong people make good times make weak people make bad times, and you just kind of start over again. Welcome to Housing Matters, the podcast that covers everything real estate, from buying your first home to building your investment portfolio. Hosted by me, Matt Pouliot, Pouliot Real Estate. Each episode brings expert insights, smart strategies, and real talk on housing and affordability. If it's about real estate, it matters here. And today, I'm thrilled to have with me Collin McGarr. Collin is a community leader and the founder and host of the Maine-ifesto Podcast. Growing up in Central Maine, Collin saw firsthand the state's potential and its structural challenges. This perspective led him to study finance and management at Bentley University before gaining practical experience in real estate development and sales in Boston, where he focused on financial analysis and due diligence for commercial and residential ventures. Collin, I'm really thrilled to have you joining us here today. And I'd like to have you get started with your journey. I mean, you grew up in Central Maine. You kind of are the quintessential went away, came back, boomerang kid. And I'd love to learn more about how you got to where you're at.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt, for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and excited to chat with you. So thank you so much. My journey, so I started in Central Maine, classic young Mainer, involved in sports, involved in student government in my high school. Really involved in the community. I think a lot of us grow up being naturally involved in the community, so I've always kind of had that kind of ingrained in my system. And, you know, I was one of those kids where I was itching to get out of Maine. I was very fortunate to have opportunities to travel when I was younger, and so I got to see a lot of the country, and that gave me this aspiration to chase the big bucks in Boston and cities, and I really thought that's what was for me. And then I wanted to build that financial and business background. I'm really passionate about finding value and creating that value through business. And that's really what Bentley taught me. So I went to Bentley to study management and finance. I had excellent education, involved with a lot of leaders down there and business professionals. And what I kept recognizing was how corporate the world is nowadays, and that instilled in me a deep appreciation for back home and protecting that. And there's nowhere else in the country or very little places in the country where you can build something that's really your own. And I don't want to be a cog in someone else's wheel. So and Maine is the perfect ecosystem for building your own wheel, you know, and with the people you love and the people that you share your community with. And so that's really why I'm back here, and kind of the story of what led me here. And adding that law degree onto that, pursuing that law degree has allowed me to kind of see how the value is made through business, and then how it's structured and how we make it more sustainable through law.
It's really interesting you mentioned that. I did have someone recently tell me that, you know, Maine is a really incredible place, particularly for entrepreneurs who want to make a go of something, because the barriers to entry are often lower than in other areas, perhaps even in Boston, where there's a lot more clamoring for titles and position, versus here it's just like, who are you? What do you bring to the table? You want to make a go of this? Let's see how we can help. Yet I often feel that that's at odds with what you just explained. The allure of glitz and glamour, something bigger, feeling sexier, if you will, yet only to find out that what you just said, you often become a cog in someone else's wheel.
Absolutely.
And I'm curious, you know, now that you're back, and where are you at with your studies for the law degree?
I just finished my first year, my 1L year.
Congrats.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and I'm on the dual JD MBA track, so I'll have my MBA in finance and my JD by May 2027, if everything goes according to plan. So
yeah, pretty motivated guy.
Yeah. I've always been motivated. I want to protect people. I want to protect my environment. I grew up hunting and fishing, and that instills a deep appreciation for the natural environment and the people and things that call this place home. And I think having a law degree and understanding how things work is a way to do that and bring people with you as you do that too.
So when you wrap up your studies, what are you kind of hoping to do in Maine?
I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I think that's a work in progress. This summer has shed a lot of light on the opportunities that exist here. You know, I think being a generalist in the legal profession will allow me to take advantage of different opportunities as they arise. You know, I have a little bit of a background in real estate. I'm looking to do transactional business work and work with entrepreneurs, work with real estate developers and agents and figure out kind of where that leads me. I want to invest in my communities. I want to be a leader and I want to be a voice for people and bring some energy and excitement into this state.
Yeah, our paths crossed recently with a mutual friend of ours, Owen McCarthy, who's running for governor. I'm really pretty excited about his campaign. We'll see whether or not he becomes a candidate, next year for Republicans. I sure hope that he does. But, he seems to be really focused on housing, and I know that that's something that you're really working on, but you also have the Maine-ifesto Podcast with the goal of kind of pulling back the pine curtain, as you say. What inspired you to start this, and what do you hope to achieve by sharing these conversations kind of more widely?
Yeah, absolutely. Just want to preface that Owen's an incredible guy. He's the quintessential Maine leader and mentor. I connected. He actually reached out. He saw my podcast and he said, "This is incredible. Like, I'd love to talk to you more about this. I'm looking to get younger people involved in these conversations because that's kind of the bedrock of this foundation that we're trying to build for the future." And he's had conversations with my younger cousins and my friends, and he wants to include everybody, and that's something that I have found in all my conversations with professionals and mentors in this state, is that they want to get people involved. The inspiration behind the Maine-ifesto podcast was really twofold: to connect Mainers to their state. Let's get some pride for this state. I keep hearing narratives there's no money in Maine. You can't find a job making over $50,000 in Maine, $60,000. But that is not true. There's people building incredible things here, innovators, thinkers, builders, designers, and people that want to help you too. And so that was the first main reason. The second main reason was really about connecting myself with individuals and building that platform where I can reach out to my community and say, "Here's this conversation I've had with so-and-so. Let's connect you." This summer has allowed me to kind of build that voice for myself. And now I have individuals come up to me in the gym and they're like, "Can you take a look at my resume? Can we talk about this issue?" I've had moms approach me at Hannaford and they're like, "You've really inspired my kid." And now there's some passion and some life and some like, here's what I want to do. And that's really the point of it. Is I'm a very energetic guy. I love to bring enthusiasm in every room. Mm-hmm. And being able to do that for my communities, it's infectious, right? Mm-hmm. And it's just allowed me to have a bigger footprint and connect with more individuals.
That's great. Yeah, I often tell people, I get requests to go to lunch meetings or coffees or whatever all the time. And what I've been trying to do recently, since this podcast has picked up more steam and is getting, more kind of traction with viewers, is say, hey, like in the case of us, why don't we just meet and do a podcast episode?
Absolutely.
Because if we're going to sit down and talk about these things one-on-one, we're just going to impact each other's brains. We might as well have an opportunity to share that with the world.
100%.
And, hopefully the world tunes in, but even if only 172 people watch, then, that's 172 people that would have been at the restaurant with us. It would have been pretty packed.
Right.
So I think ultimately it's super wise of you to look through the lens of like, how do we share this message with a broader audience and inspire some kind of motivation or excitement in Maine? Because oftentimes I think we have so many good things going on, yet we're not really great as Mainers at storytelling. And so people just think it's a bad thing. We had this kind of experience just today where I was talking about the unhoused population kind of in downtown Augusta, and you had asked, well, how does that impact values? to me, as someone who's here, I don't feel it as much as maybe somebody that doesn't live here. But that's a function of bad storytelling on our part, like to say to the world, hey, you might have seen the news articles about some folks who are in a house, but here's what we're doing to help alleviate that issue, which are some real things that are occurring. And, you know, if we don't get that message out to people, the narrative continues to be discussed, or more broadly as it relates to Maine. Maine doesn't have opportunities, which neither of those are really true.
Right. And it's connecting those individuals and having those conversations. And you hit the nail on the head when you said that it's being able to share those conversations, because I was consistently, someone would say they're interested in something to me, and I would be like, oh, I've had this cool conversation with this individual in this field, whether it's insurance or financial planning, and being able to say, here, go listen to my conversation with this financial planner, or that's doing it in Maine, that has figured out how to do it in Maine, who will teach you how to do it in Maine, is something really powerful.
Yeah, that's great. So as a young professional and a future leader in Maine, how do you see the housing market right now? I want to talk a little bit about housing in general, which is, in my opinion, particularly impacting your generation in terms of achievability, of being able to even get into the market. So kind of what feels different about how your generation is approaching real estate compared to older generations?
Yeah, it's intimidating. It's a scary wall of a lot of different narratives and voices coming at you saying certain things, and it's kind of hard to break that down. And it's the conversations that I've had with individuals my age are it's tough. I mean, competing with cash buyers, low inventory, high costs, those are all huge issues, and we've had to get creative. You know, I've brainstormed different ideas with buddies about co-owning properties, you know, house hacking, living in one unit, renting out the other units. Maine is great at providing opportunities for funding and being able to get involved and take a step in, and having multiple people go in on a deal, something like that, are decisions that we seriously have to consider. And to reach that purchasing power and be competitive with other people in the market. And I think that's just something that we as humans naturally have to do over time. You know, it's cyclical, the issues that arise and that our generations deal with. And it's getting creative, being flexible, you know, not having the perfect property right away, but we no longer can plan and save up for 2 or 3 years, have a down payment on a property, and then have that property for the next 20, 30 years. It's got to be an asset on our balance sheet, and it's got to provide value and create financial stability for us now.
Yeah, I recently had this discussion with my sister, who's the same age as you, 23, and like, she's like, well, I was reading online that I should have 6 months, saved up in addition to my down payment in order to like buy a home. And I was like, I think that is sage advice, but it's just not really a reality. You'll be waiting forever. At some point, you have to move forward and decide whether you want to do something or not with what you have for resources, as long as you see yourself being there for a period of time. But it used to be that people could do those kinds of things. You could save up more. I also think that there is, ever since NAFTA, and we basically got as much cheap stuff as we could from overseas and sold our soul as a country, people have been pushed more as consumers in this economy to buy more things that just kind of erode away at savings. Whereas previous generations had more of kind of a mindset of, I'll buy one thing and take care of it, whatever, and save my money. It does seem that it's possible, but more difficult for younger generations now, just because of inflation and also the bombardment constantly. It's like you graduate from high school and you're getting a letter in the mail, not congratulations for graduating. It's congratulations, here's your first credit card offer, and congratulations, here's sign up for fill in the blank, tens of thousands of dollars of student loan debt, right? Where essentially it gets back to what you said before, where it forces a lot of people to be in bondage from a young age to debt, it's interesting we're talking about this in context of housing debt, but there isn't really an education en masse to people who are going through the K-12 system to learn about how the rules are played. Now, you've learned about the rules because you've been focused from a business perspective with your education, but even more so with law school, right? And I'll say firsthand, there's many times where we're making laws at the State House when I was in the legislature that I knew full well that some of the people that were making those decisions to create those laws weren't really going to be able to articulate to somebody, what this means and how it's going to impact them, even though it is changing a law, because there aren't many people, myself included, who didn't have law degrees at the State House. We're just more generalists, right?
Right.
And trying to solve a problem, but not looking at it through the lens of like a legal perspective. And so I feel like a lot of times the rules that we're, playing by are aligned with, where people who are kind of in charge or have the power want people to focus their time and effort versus more on, hey, what would it be like if I were to kind of create the rules or reinvent the narrative or try to change things in a way that would work for my situation? And in doing so, in doing so in terms of following the rules of the narrative, people are just stopped from taking action because they believe that it can't happen for them or it's not for them because the rules didn't say so. I don't have 6 months of savings in my bank account, therefore I can't buy a house. It's like, that's not true.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? So I guess what I'm getting at is, how do we educate people? And I'm curious, it sounds like you're working toward doing this with your podcast and your other efforts to say, hey, look, you can make this work. Here's how. It may not be through the traditional narrative that you have been taught, but it is possible to do it. And here's some ways how to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the conversations that we have as Mainers happen around the campfire. And so I think in my experience, and so just having those conversations, I mean, our whole narratives are built around all the information that we're getting is from public national news. And if you watch the news every morning, it's all about like all the terrible atrocities that are going around the world, and it's having the conversations of the amazing, cool things that are happening every day locally and in our state that we have real influence on. That's where that conversation starts. And being able to connect those individuals. I this summer I had the opportunity to interview Nick Lacasse, who is doing renewable energy and making those conversations more accessible and understanding how those work and how they can create benefits for their communities and make those conversations accessible to younger people. And being able to broadcast that. And I've had a number of individuals come up to me this summer and been like, that was such a cool conversation. I'm going to call Nick and we're going to talk about how I can be involved in that. And so connecting those individuals, I think, and then also, I mean, we have 4,000 lawyers in the state of Maine, back to kind of like the policy conversation that we were talking about. And 4,000 lawyers in the state of Maine, that's not a lot of lawyers. And 60% of them are in Portland. And
really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Cool stat. It's scary stat because we don't, like laws, policies, how you move a project forward.
There's a lot of things I could say about that. Like maybe that's why nothing's happening in Portland.
Yeah.
But that's tongue in cheek. You're right. I mean, we have a legal system that can't even fulfill its obligations to our citizenry because we don't have enough people to take up cases of those who are charged and going before the court.
Our prosecutors. It's bad. And it's not going to get better.
I'm curious as a law student, like, obviously you have more of an entrepreneurial bend. You'll probably use your law degree to help more in business and entrepreneurship, I'm guessing, rather than prosecuting cases. Right. But how is that narrative going in the law school right now? Because as a former legislator and now just, a recovering legislator, I see almost weekly articles that say like the court system is a mess. We don't have enough people to actually engage the court system in the way it was designed to provide due process to people, for what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's ingenuity. I mean, we got to be creative about how we tackle these problems. I am someone who wants to stay away from that field. I want to focus on the growth of our communities here, and I know that also entails being a part of that conversation. But I don't know where you start with that conversation. It's low wages, it's hard work, it's it really starts with going to school and getting education. It's also bringing down the barriers too. Like law school is expensive, and it's 3 years. It's hard to do as a young person in your 20s. And so Maine law has a high average age of like 28 to 32 year olds, and these people are looking to get a steady income, and they want to get a steady job after school. I don't want to speak generally, but traditionally that's the conversation that I'm hearing, and we need young people to go in and tackle these big problems and at least talk about those problems and understand how they work too, which starts in law school, learning how the criminal system works, learning how transactions and deals are made, things like that. And so that's really the idea behind my education, and I've been able to share that story. And USM offers a great program where you can do 3 years in undergrad and then 3 years at Maine Law, and that cuts down cost. That'll have to be fact checked how many years it is, but it definitely takes a substantial amount of time off of the requirements to get your JD and your bachelor's of science. And it's a powerful program, and it's just getting some enthusiasm behind young Maine people and saying you can do this and tackle some of those issues that are right here at home.
Yeah. It's, to me, I want to stay a little bit on this topic of the young professionals in Maine and the access to real estate and so forth, because there's kind of a debate going around, or like what came first, the chicken or the egg, in terms of housing. Like, what's going to come first, economic development or housing? And I'm arguing that housing is economic development, yet a lot of municipalities don't see it that way. And so this kind of dovetails a little bit into another question I was going to ask you later. But, what are some of the biggest challenges right now in terms of, just the way the deck is stacked in Maine with housing creation? And to kind of lead that a little bit, I think local control is wonderful in many respects, but as it relates to land use and private property rights, and it's my summation that it's a bit of government overreach in terms of the ability for us to be nimble and flexible and more kind of entrepreneurial in creating housing, which is then driving up prices and just pushing people out.
Yeah, I mean, it starts with policy. I really want to find that intersection between business and law. Business creates the value, and you can have all these great financial tools and all these different programs that make it easier to get involved, but nothing happens unless the policy and municipalities are behind that initiative. And you hear that, I heard that phrase on one of your podcasts, not in my backyard. It needs to be at least in my neighbor's backyard, wanting to see economic growth here. And it takes bold legislation, and we appreciate our local control here. And I don't know if that's something that we want to do to get away from, but it needs to be, we need to be more cohesive at tackling these problems. We're too divided. And that's really what pulling back the pine curtain, my slogan for my podcast, what was designed to kind of address. And that's kind of how I think about that topic is, let's be more cohesive and tackle these issues together. And let's talk about how we can make policy more innovative to allow for growth, and then also help on the affordable housing front, So that's kind of my answer to that.
Do you feel that among your peers there is, like, the state is behind you to the extent possible, right, of creating an environment where you will have the same opportunities that previous generations had?
I think in Maine we have more opportunities. I mean, we're not signing up to go to war anymore at 18. You know, like we have the opportunity to. I have a 15-year-old cousin who's building AI businesses. He's got clients on the phone who want to implement his solutions. It's just being enthusiastic and energetic about what you're doing and passionate about, and sharing that with people. Maine has always been an entrepreneurial state. I've done a lot of research on Maine's history. It's incredible what people have done just like in their garage here. And because they had trouble when they were hunting, their boots were filling with water, or it was tough. So the LL Bean started, and it's just, we've always been that type of state and communities. And from Kennebec Ice, where they used to, we used to be the hub of ice in this whole region, where we were shipping ice all over the world. And that is still the case. There's opportunities are here to take advantage of our natural resources, of our state-provided resources, and grow that. It's just bringing back some enthusiasm. I think my generation has gotten so complacent, and we've been given handouts for so long, and we haven't had to go to war and fight for something bigger than ourselves. And I think once we wake up to that fact and things get bad enough where we're like, oh crap, I think
it's kind of like that old adage that like tough times make strong people make good times make weak people make bad times, and you just kind of start over again.
That cycle.
I really appreciate your response to this, because I feel like oftentimes there is this woe is me, it's not possible kind of mindset, if you will. And yeah, the rules have changed and the climate's different, yet we still live in a land of opportunity in terms of people being able to have way more agency than a lot of other places in the world. And what you just said, something I hadn't really considered, like the draft is gone. There isn't like this pressure as a young male particularly, but even women now too, to think that you're all of a sudden going to get thrown into war. And, you know, we are doing an okay job of avoiding some of these major conflicts that would have to send people off to basically put their life on pause for who knows how long before they can get started. Yet I feel like there's a lot of angst out there being felt by many young people, in that it's just not possible. And so then they don't start, or they get into this woe is me kind of posture, and then nothing happens.
Yeah, I think that's a common narrative we've also built over the last 10, 15, 20 years, is that we've been, even our politicians and our leaders in this state have been screaming how bad, not bad Maine is, but all these challenges. And the governor of West Virginia is constantly screaming. This is just one example I've taken from this summer, but the governor of West Virginia is always screaming, come to West Virginia, build in West Virginia, do something in West Virginia. And if we can do that and attract young people and talents, and keep the people that we have here and want to invest in the communities and provide those opportunities, we can build something incredible here.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting that you're cued into politics as well too, because, you know, we're going to be having a gubernatorial election coming up, and just watching this kind of primary field develop and so forth, the narratives are interesting. You know, you have an unenrolled candidate in Rick Bennett, who kicked off his campaign at KBS Homes. And KBS recently was considering the need to actually sue the city of Portland because they changed the deck chairs in terms of requirements and so forth in the middle of a project. The municipality did. So I think, you know, you have a situation in which you have not just one, but a candidate that's looking at office that is getting their campaign started in a, you know, facility that manufactures housing that, you know, in the real world, if you will, is facing these challenges that almost make it impossible for them to effectuate the change that we want, that we're campaigning on. And then you have people on the Republican side. We've talked about Owen, great candidate, you know, hope he gets elected as the candidate. But, you know, there's other people within the Republican primary for whom their chief campaign issue is, we need to get rid of the drug cartels, or we need to make sure that women aren't playing in sports. In boys' sports. It's like, guys, this is table scrap issues that, you know, yes, it's important that we don't have people peddling drugs in our state or people getting hurt because of how, you know, things are going on in sports, but really, like, how is that going to impact someone's pocketbook? And on the Democrat side, there's kind of this interesting field developing where, you know, one candidate is a Secretary of State that's charged with overseeing elections. Seems like a bit of a conflict of interest to me. And then another candidate whose mom is in Congress right now, and they'll both be on the ballot at the same time, the same last name, Pingree, if she's elected the candidate. So it feels a little bit kind of like, you know, nepotism in some ways. I don't know. The field is developing in a way where I feel that, you know, there's very few people that are coming to the forefront with like real solutions that are going to matter for everyday Maine people in terms of solving their problems. And I also think that we're at a tipping point where we need somebody who's going to be a big time cheerleader for the state with a ton of energy and really about bringing about a whole crew of people around them to solve these issues. Otherwise, I think like your generation will be the last generation with any kind of hope. You know, that's just going to be like, it's done.
Yeah, yeah. Fold the cards. Yeah. I mean, it starts with young people. It really does. I mean, we need young people to be involved on their planning boards and take leadership positions. that have a voice and a real strong presence in their communities and be involved in those conversations. I mean, we could talk forever about Maine's aging population and the silver wave that we're in and all the opportunity that is generating for our younger population.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a little bit, because I have a hypothesis that Maine people, the average age of a tradesperson is 47. Somebody, I think, could make a killing if they started a business that went around to all these business operators and asked them one question: what is your succession plan? They're either going to have an answer to that or not. If they don't have an answer, then this person would say to them, okay, I have some ideas that might work for you, which involves us taking care of your back of office, your billing, your estimating, all this kind of stuff that you don't want to do so that you can be out in the field. And then also, we're going to get you paired up with a young 23-year-old that just came out of community college that has no contacts, hasn't gotten a track record, right, but is a very hard worker and very bright and diligent. And we're going to pair you with this person because they're going to take over your business.
Exit strategy.
Yeah. And there isn't, to my knowledge, any of that. I hope that whoever is elected governor would implement a plan like that, because where we have this silver tsunami coming. I mean, I just talked to a local title company, great reputation. You know, I was there last closing. I'm like, what are you guys doing? Oh, we're just closing up. I'm like, you've got over 20 years of goodwill. The phone rings all the time.
It's a profitable business.
Totally. But nobody's really kind of sitting down with these business owners and saying, let's get everything into Excel. Let's understand, you know, like where your business is profitable, where it's not, so that we can see what the likelihood of being able to sell it is, or even transitioning it to somebody else.
Yeah.
Because a lot of their records are just written on the back of an envelope.
Right. Entrepreneurship through acquisition. It's going to be a huge thing. And I in May, I went to this conference that Startup Maine hosts, where they host local investors and entrepreneurs throughout Maine, from clamming initiatives in coastal Maine to Tambark, which is building solutions for plastic replacements, and they use like wood fibers from Maine trees to build these plastic alternatives. Really ingenious. Yeah.
Teamwork makes the dream work.
Teamwork makes the dream work. And they host these little conferences where you can go and meet with the entrepreneurs and investors. And I was the youngest kid there by far, and talking with these investors, and it's incredible. We should have everybody that can attend go to those events and meet with those people. And so one of the big events was, because they hosted, it was like a whole week, and they had different seminars on different things where experts would give their sage advice on various expertise and industries that they were involved in. Mm-hmm. And one of the big ones was ETA, Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition. And on the panel, there was 3 people, right? And all 3 of them were from New York, Boston, and Texas. And they were coming here and buying Maine small businesses. They were coming here buying Maine small businesses. They were fixing them up. They were looking at their balance. They find profitable businesses. They fix them up. And then that goes into their portfolio. They keep management in place. And then it's a hands-off not passive. They spend a couple hours a week developing the business, but it's incredible what people are doing. And those are opportunities that are slipping through young Mainers' fingertips. Yeah. And so we got to be ahead of this silver wave, or it is going to overtake us for sure.
What do you think would compel one of your friends that maybe is in a trade to do something like that? I mean, would they just need to hear from someone that says, hey, look, this business generates X amount of revenue a year. We think these are the growth projections for this business. You know, we'll help you take it over. No cost to you. You're going to buy it through time or whatever. I mean, what kind of message do people need to hear to like take action, do you think?
They need, I mean, that's the whole message behind the podcast, I think, is hearing from a voice that sounds like them, that comes from a place like them, that it's saying, these are the opportunities, like, let's get involved. And how do we do that? And I think I want to do that. I want to be that voice. I want to bring the business expertise where I can say, hey, let's look at these financials. Let's look at the cash flow statements, and let's figure out how this is profitable and where it's profitable. And then I want to take the legal expertise and say, this is how we do it. And this is the foundation and the guardrails of how we do this and scale this business. And so, I mean, everybody I talk to says, yeah, let's do it. And it's that next step. You know, I still got 2 more years of school. I'm battling this semester 4 law classes, 2 MBA courses. I'm the president of a couple different clubs. And so for me, it's a time constraint right now, but I really want to be that voice that can that can show people how to learn how to do that. And the internet is so accessible. There is no excuse anymore, zero excuse anymore to not being able to not understanding how to do this. It is so accessible, from AI to YouTube. It's all, it's there for us. So it goes back to the complacency thing. We're so used to handouts and having life be easy and perfect that we have created a weaker mindset, I feel like. And so it's fighting that narrative and building back the real roots and cultural fabric of what Maine has always been.
Mm-hmm. I've talked about it a little bit on this podcast, but I'm curious your thoughts. There's kind of this hypothesis that the majority of jobs now that are available, particularly in Maine, are a lot more of these, we'll call them heart jobs, like nursing. I don't keep going on, even teaching to some extent. Different jobs that historically it's been thought more that it should be women doing those jobs, or women, or not should be, that's the wrong way to put it, but I mean are more interested in doing those jobs. They gravitate toward that more. But then, like, historically, when you look back in time, the majority of teachers were male, you know, and we did have a lot of male nurses at one point in time. But then, for whatever reason, like, the narrative changed around these jobs being more for women than for men. And I'm just curious, like, if you think that's true, and also if so or not, why? Because majority of the jobs now that seem to be posted or available, a lot of them are more of these what we call like heart jobs that maybe young men might not see themselves fitting in that role, even though it might be a good job for them.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I have a huge family, like 30 to 40 cousins,
wow.
Wide reach, and they all have their own friends too, and they're all a significant portion of them are in this transition period where it's like, I'm done high school, what do I do next? And a lot of them are going into the nursing, healthcare field, what have you. And I think that's just the narrative that's been built. It's a stable income, and it's got good growth and good benefits, and it is, and a large majority of them are women for sure. And men, it's business school, and I hear a lot of kids talk about wanting to invest in real estate and get into
Really?
Yeah.
What is that? What are those conversations like?
It's a glamorous thing, I think, that people think it is. People have this idea that they're going to buy a property and they're going to live in one unit, rent out 3 units, and then in 2 or 3 years they're going to sell it, make a bunch of cash, and then finance the next property. And that's awesome. That's great. But then they reach these hurdles where it's like, okay, you bump up against those roadblocks where, you know, it's hard to find financing. It's hard to align all these different state programs and federal programs, and being able to get from point A to point B is really hard. And I think that's where people get stage fright and end up not pursuing those endeavors. And so that's kind of where I like to bring reality to those conversations. I want to say, like, yes, that's awesome, but it's also like that's a big project, and it's not going to be profitable for a few years. And for a lot of these people, they're already in debt. They already have rent they have to pay. They have student loans they have to pay, and so that's a bigger conversation. And I think a lot of young people really know what is.
I think the student loan thing. I don't really have any objective data on this, but it's my impression that really is precluding a lot of people from being able to move forward, because they may have a good job, but their parents, or definitely the majority of them, their grandparents, had good jobs for their time too, but they didn't have the saddling of the debt, the student loan debt, which oftentimes, you know, I'll see buyers running through this analysis of getting approved for a loan and everything is green until they plug in the student loan debt, and it's like, your debt to income ratio is too high, you're done. So this is where, and maybe we could talk a little bit about this, where house hacking can come into play for young people, but their expectations have to kind of be appropriate as to what that is. You know, you talked about, hey, getting a 4-unit building, which is an amazing thing to do with an FHA loan in America. Somebody can buy up to a 4-unit building with 3.5% down. But if their plan is to somehow essentially flip that the FHA doesn't want people doing that. They have rules around people
Right.
not doing it. Some people still do, but the whole point of the program is to build longer term wealth. But I don't think a lot of times people are thinking about, hey, look, I could actually just get in, live in that 4-unit, and then never sell it. Like just move out and then use all the income from that building to qualify for the ranch home on an acre of land with a picket fence, if that's what I want,
Right.
by myself, and still keeping that cash generating thing going. Because that's really one thing that we never learn about in school is cash flow. You know, like we learn, go get a job, get an income, and that's great. That should be lauded, and hopefully that doesn't change. However, there's not a discussion about creating cash flow, which is essentially the money that you get from income minus all your expenses on real estate or other things, but mostly real estate in the United States. And all the tax laws that we have really primarily drive people toward private property ownership, because when you think about it, that's the only way the government is ever relevant.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
like, if people don't have private property and a need to protect that, why should they listen to the government at all?
Yeah.
And more people are not becoming part of that ownership piece that we saw historically in this country. There's more and more renters being created, and that's creating more of a mindset of like, I don't have skin in the game.
Right.
So getting back to like where we kind of like started this, in order for our country and democracy to perpetuate itself the way that we have for 250 years, we need to have accessibility to private property in order for people to be participants in the whole system.
Yeah.
And right now we've created an environment in which there's much more pressure toward renters, either from structural gaps in financing that say you can't get a loan, even though we know that you would pay it. And 99% of people pay their loans before everything else because they don't want to default on it. To the housing that's being created, a lot of it is just rentals, you know, and not like new accessible homes for ownership that are something that actually people who are 23, 24 years old could afford to buy with student loan debt and average median wages.
Right. Right.
And so to me, it almost seems like the only way out is to, you said this earlier, like it's cyclical and it's true. Yesterday I went to a house, I was mentioning this to you before we started, where the family owned this house, still owns, the estate still owns it. They've had it for 68 years. It's a duplex. They raised 3 kids, a family of 5 on a first floor, probably, I'm guessing like 1,100 at most square foot, you know, 3-bedroom apartment. And then they rented out the upstairs. And like financially that worked for them. And then we went away from smaller home sizes, like in 1950, about 900 square feet, to now it's like about 2,400 square feet in terms of the average home size that's built in America, not Maine. And I think we either have to start having a realization that we need to go back to the house hacking that you talked about a little bit earlier, not with the idea of making a ton of money out of it, but just the idea of having cash flow to pay the bills as a means to an end, so that you get your foot in the water with property ownership and, you know, a seat at the table, so to speak, in the game that we're playing, which is the game that was created by our government. Or you don't. You're either in the game or you're not.
Right.
Right. And this is what's creating more of this have and have not situation in the United States, where people don't feel like they have any stake in anything. So what's there for me to get up and fight for? I don't have anything to fight for.
Yeah. Buy into your community.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So, and I guess, I mean, that's kind of a long-winded narrative around the fact that we have structural gaps that exist. And part of this is educating people on opportunities. Like maybe somebody that's 23 out there hears this and says, look, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring of buying a multifamily building and living in it, not with the idea of making a ton of cash off it, but just so that I can get started.
Generating a little bit of cash flow.
Yeah.
And that can make a huge difference. I'm a renter right now personally in Portland. I have the opportunity to live with my mother when I'm in the Augusta area, but in Portland I'm renting. And I have chosen to not buy into property because I invest. You know, with that financial background, I got really into the markets and building value that way, and that has allowed me to, you know, build that nest a little bit more and find the right when that opportunity arises, take advantage of that property when it's the right time for me, and I have the necessary capital, I guess. And I think that these conversations really start in our public education system. One of my biggest takeaways from the podcast this summer was how intermingled all these issues are. You know, I go to talk with Gordon Smith about the Maine Medical Association and the structure of healthcare in this state, and we talk about affordable housing and the public education system. And so my next guest, and I really wanted to build a story with the podcast as well. And so my next guest was my public high school teacher, you know, talk about some of the real systemic issues we have, some of the behavioral challenges that are coming through the school. And with this new technology and these new behaviors that we're sort of building around how we interact today. And it starts in the public education classroom. And we need to take a hard look at what our kids are being taught in public education. I got to Bentley University, and the first thing I was scared. I was like, this is insane.
This must have been during the pandemic.
Yeah. So I graduated high school in 2020. I started undergrad right in the midst. You know, I was getting my bag lunch outside of the auditorium at Bentley, and all of these kids had very robust personal finance courses. They understood real estate. They had given business pitches, things like that. And so if we can take a really hard look at our public education system and build these tools from the time that, you know, that they're interacting with these topics or what have you, is important. And I think a layer to this onion that we're discussing.
Yeah, that's interesting, because it's almost like in order for us to solve this, we need more people to view themselves as an entrepreneur. And it's almost like, certainly we don't learn entrepreneurship through school. I remember when I was going off to college, I had like this general study that I was going to do. And then someone was like, you got to have pick a focus area. And I was like, well, I guess I'll pick entrepreneurship because I want to have a business, you know. But I was driving thinking to myself, why am I going to college for entrepreneurship? Don't entrepreneurs just go out and start getting shit done, you know? And I've obviously come to appreciate that in time. But as like an 18-year-old, kid, I was like, well, I don't need to go to college to learn about starting a business. Let's just go start one.
Right.
And nothing, obviously, in my opinion, now could be any further from the truth. Having those fundamentals is important. Yeah, if someone goes off to become a nurse, they don't often learn about some of these business principles. I mean, I recently sat down with my parents who were looking at doing a real estate acquisition and kind of broke some things down and, revealed to them their financial position, which ended up being way better than what they thought it was, despite the fact that they've done everything right for like 40 years. My dad was like, wow, I could actually retire today. I'm like, yeah, you could, if you want
incredible.
to, right? But there's never, my dad did everything the right way. Got up every day, went to work, built ships at VIW, and was a very big part of our national defense. My stepmom, a hardworking nurse, now a school nurse, right? These people get up and do everything they're supposed to, yet they're not learning about some of the other things relative to real estate or the things that you've dug into from a business perspective, because it wasn't part of the traditional training.
Those technical skills.
Right. It's almost like Maine we started this podcast this way, which is Maine has an environment that really is pro-entrepreneur, yet we don't do a great job of teaching entrepreneurship, if you will, and the different facets that go into owning a business or whatever. Even if someone doesn't choose to do it, again, learning the rules of the game. Because life is a game. We're all playing it. Some are on the sidelines and some are out on the field, And if you're out on the field, you better know how the rules of the game are played, or else you're going to get a foul called on you, or you're going to get kicked out, or you're not going to be successful, right? But I feel like a lot of people are like, I want to show up to the game. I'm here. I'm at the game. Yet they don't know all the rules of the game. It's like my wife watching the Super Bowl once a year.
Right.
She's like, how many players are out there? Super sweet, awesome person, not her jam to learn about football, right? Meanwhile, you got guys like Jimmy Johnson, who used to run the Cowboys. I mean, he knows every single thing about the game. And the Cowboys never would have been the Cowboys without Jimmy Johnson. Despite what Jerry Jones thinks, that he's the coach of the team. He's not, And so often I feel like, I'm really thrilled what you're doing with your podcast, and the message that you're trying to get out is broader than just you. I mean, you could just put your head down, do your studies, stay in your lane. I mean, you're staying in your lane, but without sharing with the world about what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, none of this matters unless we're doing it together.
Yeah.
That's what I grew up being ingrained in. Like I grew up with a relatively single mother, and I had to reach out to people to understand topics and to get those resources that I needed, and that instilled with me this passion for connecting with mentors and building those relationships, and that's. And in Maine, we have those community leaders that are so ready to help everybody too. And it's very accessible. I mean, you can go talk to a legislature. I mean, what are we doing right now? Talking to someone who was in government. And that was just Owen McCarthy connecting us, you know? And those conversations are so accessible. And you're right. I mean, it's incredible what we have here.
Yeah, I think it's easier for people to say it's not accessible in an environment where it actually is accessible. It's easier to say that because that kind of absolves them of the need to kind of take agency and really, work toward affecting change.
Right.
It's just like, well, back to the woe's me, it's not possible is an easier default narrative to kind of buy into than it actually is possible. It's going to require you to maybe show up to a meeting or get engaged or whatever. But if you do show up, people will listen to you, Like I remember many times in the legislature, particularly when I was on the education committee, we'd have students from high school, middle school, even elementary school come in and testify. And those were by far the most impactful testimonies, because ultimately, while the adults in the room like to think it's about them, it really was about the kids when it came to education. Like the reason we're spending over $1 billion a year on this is because of them. Yes, we need good teachers in the classroom, and they are adults, but they're there to serve the children, and the future generations. And so that's why those were impactful. But I could imagine from a kid's perspective, particularly if they were in a home that wasn't encouraging them to go speak, they would think, well, why would I show up to the Maine State Legislature and share my views on this? They're not going to care.
Right.
And I'm here saying, as a legislator, those were some of the most impactful, things, right? Because we like to think, we got all the solutions to all the problems, and it will be in their best interest, and that's not true. Like, how does this really feel for you?
Right. Well, crazy topic. I have networked with politicians in the state of Maine, and one of the craziest things this summer that I heard is that a lot of the people involved in actually building the policies and doing a lot of the work for our state government are out-of-state people. Mm-hmm. Is that your experience?
There's a lot of influence from the lobby in government in general. And in Maine, we don't have term limits anymore. I mean, we do have term limits, rather. And so you have a situation in which the longest tenured people in the legislature are generally less than 8 years for the most people. And you've got some people that have been around longer than that bounce between the House and the Senate. But I was recently talking with somebody about this. Like, at first, my perception was like, lobbyists are bad. However, after being there I was there for 12 years, I came to the conclusion that lobbyists were good as long as you had lobbyists from both sides of the issue. Because if, one guy's like, hey, this is the best thing ever, and the other guy's like, this is the worst thing ever, and you listen to their points of view thoroughly on both sides, you then have kind of a counterpoint on the topic that then can be like used to make a decision through the lens of like people who have been around for a while. I mean, and some of the out-of-state lobbyists that come in like over and over again. It was very rare that you'd have an out-of-state lobbyist that would be effective, just kind of dropping in, helicoptering in. Usually what they would do is hire a more local lobbyist that had the relationships with legislators to be their point person, because that person could also tell them, well, 4 years ago we tried this, and here's what happened, and here's why it happened, and you'd get that kind of a point of view from the lobbyists that had been around for a while. And anytime somebody would just kind of helicopter in, it's the same main vibe, right? Like, you're from away.
Yeah.
Should we trust you? Probably not, but probably we should, but we're not going to, So it's like one of these things where you have now, I think, a little bit more power bestowed upon the lobbyists that are really good and effective at building relationships and genuine in their intent. And, there are ones that you can trust and ones that you can't trust, and you come in time to figure out who those people are. But the ones who really are trustworthy are very effective because they can say, look, it's great, Collin, that you have this bill that you want to try to, make sure everybody graduates with financial literacy before they're done with high school, which is one of the bills that I got passed. But they're like, here are some of the challenges with when they tried this in the past. And, if you want to be effective in what you're doing, you might try making these changes over here, and you can kind of weigh that out. So, in an environment with term limits, I think the lobby becomes more powerful. And it's different at a federal level in a lot of ways because the money is just so much bigger. And there's a lot of influence now since Citizen United on, campaigns, particularly at the national level. And you pair that with gerrymandering, and you really are broken down to only a handful of races in the United States that are really actually truly competitive.
Wow.
So, we could have a whole other podcast about this, but essentially getting back to your question about out-of-state lobby and their power or their influence. I think a lot of the policy changes are driven by out-of-state initiatives having occurred. In an existence of federalism, what we have in this country, this situation of local governance, state governance having, a fair amount of power. There are things that happen in California or Florida or Texas or whatever that people are trying to get to happen in Maine. And that, in a lot of cases, ends up being ballot initiatives that are really problematic because you get one question to try to address. You're going to law school. You know how deep it is to get into the statutes and the therefores and the comma in the right place and all this kind of stuff that really impacts what that means in real life for how the law is implemented. And so there's a lot of push nationally, especially on Maine, because we have a really low bar for getting initiatives on the ballot as ballot initiatives, which are essentially creating law through populism.
Right.
And it's not the way that we were created to work. We're supposed to be a representative government, and people, you elect them, they represent you in government, and you try to get, some consensus on issues through a lot of conversation. And instead it's synthesized to one question on a ballot, yes or no.
Wow.
It's like there's a lot more to making this.
Yeah.
That's how we legalized marijuana in Maine, and then there was so many problems with it that had to go back to the legislature to get fixed. The law that passed at the ballot would have allowed 14-year-old kids to buy edibles, and we obviously were like, that wasn't the intent, this needs to get fixed, and it did get fixed.
Wow.
I think we have a pretty good environment for that now in Maine, but it was a disaster for the first few years.
Interesting. I think a lot of that ties really back into Maine law and who's educating the lawyers and the legal professionals of this state. And there's been a big shift. I've networked with a couple different individuals that graduated from Maine law 10, 15 years ago. And they tell me that Maine law was all Maine kids. It was all Maine people coming to that school, and part of that was because the old building was dilapidated, and now we have this beautiful building right in the old port. But a lot of the
It's
issues.
interesting how people are drawn toward the structure versus the content.
Yeah.
How much did the content change in 15 years?
Right,
I don't know.
Right, exactly. Yeah, but they're building the Maine Center down there. That's an incredible initiative. I just did a podcast on the director of that initiative, and they're doing some really incredible things and attracting talent from all over the country now, all over the world. And it's incredible, but one of the question becomes, are you going to stay in Maine, and do you care about the Maine people? And that ties back into the question of, if we're funding this education, if Mainers are funding this education, contributing to that education, are you going to stay here or are you going to leave? And that's a big issue when you look at the stat that there's 4,000 lawyers in the state of Maine, 60% of them are in Portland, and a large portion of those people are working for giant law firms who typically work on issues and deals outside of the state of Maine.
Well, this is a reason why we had a program longstanding called the Maine Opportunity Tax Credit, which everyone didn't know what it meant. What does that mean? Well, it was for student loan debt forgiveness and whatnot. And it had all these different metrics and matrix of who qualified and when and how much money you would get and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, this is too friggin' complicated. Wow. I'm a marketing guy at heart. And I'm like, how are we going to market this?
Salesman, yeah.
Yeah. And so how are we going to get the word out about this? Well, let's rename the program the Student Loan Repayment Program. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out now what it's for. And the governor, to her credit, allocated about $60 million in the budget to make this happen because we had near unanimous support in the House and Senate because it was very much simplified. Now, before with all these things, do you qualify? Where did you go? When did you graduate? All that. No, we just axed it to one simple thing. Did you graduate after 2007? And two things really. And did you make student loan payments? And if you did, then you get a dollar for dollar match up to a benchmark. It was actually fun.
It's 2,500.
It is, yeah. And so what happened was you had some cohorts, particularly doctors, that were getting, maybe 10 or 12,000. They obviously have a lot of student loan debt. And then other people that were getting like $1,200, and instead we just said everybody's going to get the same. It's up to $2,500.
Okay.
If you paid $27,000 towards your loans this year, you're still getting a $2,500 credit. If you paid $2,500, you get a $2,500 credit. If you only paid $1,100, you're only going to get $1,100. So it's kind of an incentive to do more with debt payoff, but it also completely simplified it. I mean, I could just explain to you in 30 seconds. You graduate after 07 and you have student loan debt and you make payments, you qualify. And, when I sat down before changing this law to do our taxes, and my wife had student loan debt, it was like, our accountant was like, we don't know if you qualify or whatever, and this year, things were on pause a little bit because of COVID, and then she resumed making payments last year. And the accountant's like, yep, and you're $2,500 for student loans, because you graduated after 07 and you made at least $2,500 in payments. And she made way more than that, but that's the cap. And so what happened was, and also the key, we made it refundable. So if people didn't have $2,500 in tax liability, it doesn't really matter much to them. But by being refundable, if they paid the amount, then they get that back. So it really is designed to help reduce more debt. Hopefully people use the money they get back to plow toward their debt. We all know that's not going to happen with everybody. But it really, to me, is an example of how, I'm just a guy that grew up in Central Maine. I went to the University of Maine at Augusta after high school because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And then when I was 25, I got a call from a mentor, speaking of mentors, saying, would you run for office? And I said, sure.
That's incredible.
And so then get thrust into an environment where we can affect change around, tens of thousands of people's lives over the next decades, unless the program gets changed, and probably hundreds of millions of dollars in investment. But people are only going to get that. And the reason why I bring all this up is if they stay in Maine. You can't move to California and get the Maine student loan repayment tax credit. It was really changed in a way to incentivize you're here, you're paying your student loan down, you get it. You leave, you don't. Whereas before there was a lot of push toward big money toward it for certain cohorts of people. They suck up all that money and then leave. And so hopefully in time this becomes more familiar to people and more of an anchor for them to stick around. Okay, if I make my payments for 10 years and I have 10 years of $25,000 in debt, it's essentially going to get paid by the state. I mean, I need to work, earn money, pay it first,
right?
But then I get it back.
Absolutely, yeah. And that was one of the first programs that I saw when I was researching. Do I come back to Maine? Do I go to law school? It was that program.
Oh, cool.
And I heard about that through Live and Work Maine, who does a lot of different marketing campaigns.
Yeah, they're paid by the state to market the program.
Yeah, exactly.
But before, it's got something different running it now. But before, there was very difficult for them to articulate who would get it and what the benefit would be, and to say with assurance you'll get it. Now we can tell people, look, you graduated after 07. Did you make payments? Yeah. Do you have $2,500 in liability? No problem. It's refundable for you. Oh yeah, I owe $10,000 in taxes. Well, you'll get $2,500 of it paid for by the
Made
state.
it more digestible. For individuals.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's incredible what that program can do. I have a question for you about poverty in the state of Maine. I mean, we're right down by the river. This is a beautiful street, and you go half a mile down the road, and it's you can't. It's young families can't live here.
Yeah.
It's not. I don't know the word for it, but it's not sustainable or suitable for young families to come here and stay here. And with these programs, a lot of the funding going towards these social safety nets is, I feel like, creating almost a containment, not a safe zone, but like a containment situation where people are coming here because of the resources that the state is providing, and it's acting as a magnet towards that. And you look down the road, there's all these big historic buildings, and they're vacant. The windows are smashed in, and people won't live there. And so, can we talk about how poverty is playing in this role of building these communities.
Yeah, it's fun because now I feel like I'm on your podcast. Definitely. I would love to chat about this because we recently wrapped up a task force in the city of Augusta on Augusta's homeless population and unhoused population, however you want to phrase it, and talking about like what are some of the core issues that are leading to this. And I mean, it maybe not a revelation to some, but the group was like, well, the primary core to address this issue is more housing. Like Maine needs 84,000 units of housing.
Yeah.
But I was there saying it's not just housing. You need the wraparound services. So ever since we deinstitutionalized in this country in the 1980s, we basically told, the world, we don't want anybody in institutions. We want to free them out to the world and to be taken care of by service organizations, which the government will create, grants for these people to apply. They apply, then they provide the service. The problem with that model is it's really not sustainable because you then have a bunch of organizations that are chasing grants constantly, that if the grants dry up, they're out of business, right? And somebody who's unhoused can't pay a bill to an organization for their service that they're providing. And what's happened now is we've come full circle to the point where we're essentially creating institutions, but we don't want to call them that. It's like a housing first model where some people will go to these facilities. Some of them have been created in Portland. There's been efforts to create them here and elsewhere. And some of them will never leave. It'll be like the Hotel California for them. They can check in, but they're never going to leave because they're never mentally capable of living, out on their own. Yet we don't want to say they're in an institution, even though it is a soft institution. Because why these models have seen some success is because people go there. Mental health professionals, the EMTs will show up to meet with people in the entry area if there's an issue going on medically, or doctors will come in and have visits with people there. And,
like OTPs?
Yeah, there's a lot of different professionals that kind of come to the table in these environments to provide services to the people that are living in that building.
Right.
But if that same individual was living in an apartment next door or on the street, even worse, they don't have access to those services, or they do, but not in a structured way.
Interesting.
And so you have then even a smaller subsect of the population that, despite having access to all the services, just don't want it. And I don't think we've really fully reconciled the fact that there is such a thing as free will. And some people, it's going to be crazy probably to hear this, but they actually do want to live under a bridge. If there's a very small amount of people, right? I'm not suggesting that the entire unhoused population wants to be unhoused, but there are some people that just don't want to or can't mentally ascribe to the social order that we've constructed, right? It just doesn't reconcile for them. And they either need to be left alone, which is not good for them, or put into some kind of an institutional environment, but then they don't want to be there. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's kind of like, where does free will play into this? And that's kind of at odds. But getting back to how do we help people feel safe and so forth, the city of Augusta, the state of Maine at writ large, needs to do a better job of having in place real kind of institutional environments in which people can go to for hopefully a period of time where they can demonstrate, hey, I've rehabilitated or I'm better or whatever, and go. Because there's a huge part of this that is related to drugs, which those oftentimes can be rehabilitated and addressed. And other times people are dealing with severe and persistent mental illness that no matter how much rehabilitation happens or access to professionals, the way their brain is wired is not in line with the social constructs that we've created, and it just never will be.
Right.
And historically, people went to places like AmHigh or whatever when that was the case. And we don't have those places anymore unless somebody is like a criminal. Then they go there to be held instead of a regular jail. And I think that we're going to need to come to the realization that some people need to live in institutional environments where they're really got a lot of support around them because their brain doesn't work the way, who's normal? I don't know who's normal, but what some would suggest is quote unquote normal. Their brain doesn't function that way. Mm-hmm. So, and I've really experienced this a lot, particularly around drug addiction issues, with family and so forth, and learning about how that getting into the system really does rewire someone's brain. And so the person that you once knew, it's not that they're still the same, like they look the same, maybe, unless they've been really impacted by how much use they've had. But they don't function the same because it literally just rewired the neural pathways in their brain. And to a lot of people, they'll say, "What's wrong with you?" And the reality is, it's nothing like wrong. It's a disease, you know. Like when someone gets cancer, we don't say, "Well, what's wrong with you? Why did you get cancer?" You know, it's like, "I'm sorry that you have that." So some compassion needs to come in as well as it relates to this issue. And I find often that the community doesn't want to have the unhoused population around or being an issue. Yet, right back to what we talked about before about not wanting to engage in solving the issues, when presented with data and real solutions about things that could happen, many people just don't show up to the part of like, oh, it takes a community to solve this issue. And I think that's, has happened a little bit recently in Augusta. We had a lot of momentum going with downtown, a lot of people showing up, getting engaged and everything. And then the pandemic happened and it basically told everybody, like, don't leave your house, don't come engage, don't be a human being, and people just kind of cooled off a little bit. And now with some of the more recent economic challenges, people have been putting their head down. They're going to go like earn an additional 9% this year because inflation was 9%. And it's hard to have time to volunteer and get engaged. And so again, another kind of long answer. I feel like I'm more of a guest on your podcast now than you on mine, but it's an issue of two things: not having the institutions that we once had to address folks who really need that kind of environment in a more humane kind of way. And secondly, a disinterested citizenry that only wants to point out the problem and not show up to. It's like everybody's yelling fire, but who's going to go get a hose and help put it out?
Yeah, right. Yeah, and it seems really concentrated to me, and
it's concentrated among service centers. So
right.
It's more prevalent in Augusta, Lewiston, Auburn, Portland, Bangor,
which is where the issue is.
Yeah.
Right, and so like coming up with innovative solutions like having a moving van that moves throughout the city, and which Portland has been doing to keep a concentration from one area. They move. They have services that move around the city, and that spreads things out, which creates its own problems. But having something like that, so it's not concentrated on this street, like and so businesses can thrive down here.
There's an organization in Maine called Maine-Works, and really what they do, it would be a great guest for you to have on your podcast. Margot Walsh, she's a wonderful entrepreneur who started this company helping people who are in recovery like get into the workforce, mostly in construction. And it's a temp hire agency, right? And they have a lot of success of people matriculating from the temp, hire into full-time hire in these positions. But for her engagement, they wouldn't be given a chance because of their criminal record or past use with drugs and whatnot. And a lot of it is about just people being empathetic and giving people a chance.
Absolutely.
And not just saying, oh, you at one time you were a drug addict, so you're dead to the world. Like that's a crazy narrative. And she's working to break down those barriers. But at the same time, once people have these jobs, it gives them a sense of purpose and a reason to not use, because it's like, man, I've been working hard toward this thing and it's actually making my life better. I don't want to mess that up.
Right.
Versus the alternative, which is, why wouldn't I get high today? It makes me feel better sleeping under a bridge.
Yeah, right. And Kimberly Twitchell talked a lot about that in the context of affordable housing and breaking down that stigma and stereotypes, which is a lot more prevalent, I feel like, once you go past like Brunswick, and it's having those conversations. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, our neighborhood has a group chat, and people were going nuts about the fact that this unhoused person is living up in the woods behind us now. And I couldn't help myself but to like share the report from the city of Augusta, homelessness task force, to be like, hey guys, here's some actionable items that you could do to help address the issue.
Right.
Besides just calling the police and complaining about it.
Right. And that's that whole kind of narrative we've built, that complacency, back to that complacency aspect where we like to complain about what's going on in the government and what's going on in our communities. But the people that are going to change stuff are the people that step up and voice it and look for innovative solutions. So.
Yeah, like what you're doing. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation, pretty wide-ranging and thoughtful. And I'm curious, for those who are listening that want to learn more about you and what you're doing, where would they go?
Just look me up, Collin McGarr. A bunch of my different initiatives are right online. I do a lot with AI, so I've been building a legal AI tool. This is kind of just a fun side note, but a legal AI tool where you can input, and it's still in its development stage, but you can input a topic that you're interested on, and it gives you the backdrop on it. It looks at at it through the lens of Maine policy, law, and business, and it talks about it in the context of different professional domains. So if you put in ADUs, it'll give you how that's affecting construction workers, developers, and the whole 9 yards. It's a cool tool. So if you just look me up, you can hear all my episodes. I have 2 more in the works, and I'll hopefully be continuing it over the course of this year. It's been an incredible way for me to get involved in a lot of higher level conversations, and so just look me up. My LinkedIn's right on my page, and I'm always interested in creating synergies and connecting with people and being a mentor and also being a mentee. So.
Yeah, and for those listening, it's Collin McGarr, right?
Yes, sir.
Great. Collin, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Matt. It's a
Appreciate
pleasure.
it.